Drex is a pillar in the Poi community. He has the largest Poi channel on YouTube, the most amount of Poi tutorials available to the public for free, on top of having a very successful Patreon for his Poi videos. This podcast is for the community, and it's been an absolute honor to contribute to our space in whatever way that I can. Enjoy the episode, my friends, and welcome to the Poidcast. Drex, welcome, and thank you for being our 8th guest on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate you being here. As you all know, this is a project very near and dear to my heart. So again, I'm thankful for your involvement and your time today. On a video of yours at some point, I had heard you talking about the idea of starting a Poi podcast, but that never quite developed. I'm curious what held you back from doing it?
So that's just it. I did do it at one point. I did a podcast where I interviewed several people that had kind of like started businesses in the flow arts. I talked to ᴠɪᴜᴏᴜᴜ, who started up Harmonic Threads. I talked to I can't remember her last name. Her first name is Mary. She goes by Blitzen. She's a glover who made some inroads in Hollywood, and it was a fun project, but I never really got the kind of engagement that I wanted to see out of it. And I think a part of that is flow arts by its very nature is quite visual, and it can be hard to produce quality content around audio that will still have a value add for listeners who are interested in taking those lessons and applying them to the visual art. So in the end, that just wound up being a problem that I decided I was okay with somebody else solving. Like, somebody else can specialize in this. I've already got my
Yeah, absolutely. And you did the profiles in Poi and the more specific interview style stuff, which was very great in its own right. I've seen all of that stuff probably several times over. So but podcasting has developed.
The plan worked, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, cool. I just wanted to bring that up briefly, but let's you've shared parts of your story and how you got into Poi in your early beginnings on several different videos throughout the years on your channel. But for the sake of our audience and this episode, take us all the way back to your introduction into Poi. How and when did that happen?
Sure. So we're gonna roll back the clock here, calendar, whichever, all the way back to August/September of 2006. That was when I went to my first Burning Man, and it was kind of a lark that happened. People who try to go to Burning Man now are gonna listen to this and they just facepalm, because I actually got a ticket just by chance a week before the event, and basically had to do my planning very, very quickly. Drove out from Boulder, Colorado with a friend. Like it literally just came together at the last minute, and you cannot do that anymore. That is pretty much impossible to do at this point.
Just ran into a ticket. Yeah.
I know. Now I want to see, I was on Craigslist. Like I had some friends who were just like, you should check out this thing called Burning Man. They'd been trying for a couple of years to get me out there, and finally it just like somebody popped up with a ticket on Craigslist. I'm like, oh shoot, okay, I guess this will be the year that I go try it, right? I'm really, really glad I got to experience it while that was still possible. But yeah, so I showed up, and I mean, the event absolutely blew my mind. Of the many things that blew my mind there, one of those things was fire spinning. And the first time I really encountered it in a way that stuck in my head was Wednesday night. There was a fire jam at, I want to say it was Hookah Dome. And man, it was just hypnotic. I remember just like sitting there with my jaw on the ground, like watching all the fire spinners do their various things. And ironically, like the one person that stuck out in my head was a hooper who, like, even at the time, I think I was kind of aware that she was still kind of like a beginner. Like all she could really do was keep it up around her waist doing core hooping and everything. But she had the biggest smile on her face. Like it just, the absolute joy that this was bringing her. And that was part of what kind of roped me in. And then seeing Fire Conclave on Burn Night for the first time, which is just overwhelming. And nobody had told me that the opening act to seeing the man burn was like hundreds of fire spinners from all over the world performing for the audience and basically going ham. And like it was watching Fire Conclave that I kind of like. It had so much of an impact on me. I'm just kind of like, okay, I'm going to learn how to do this. So came back to Colorado afterwards, where I was living at the time, and asked around to my friends. And I literally spent months asking this. I'm like, hey, what was that fire thing we saw at Burning Man? Do we know anybody who does? And finally, I had a friend who's just like, what do you mean poi? And like, I had no idea what poi meant. I just was like, okay, that could be it. Sure. It's a better answer than just somebody giving me a blank expression. So I said, yes, how do I learn how to spin poi? And it's literally that arbitrary that poi is where I went. And it turned out that our friend Paul, he goes by the name Salty, knew some stuff about poi spinning and fire dancing. So I asked him for a lesson, and he took me under his wing, and we had our first lesson for like 2 hours. And I proceeded to absolutely fail to learn everything. I was not good at this. There were just some basic ideas of like, plane orientation and everything that I could not understand for the life of me. Like, and poor Salty, he's sitting there for like the better part of 2 hours, just like staring at me. He's like, I don't know how to fix this for you, buddy. I'm sorry. So I actually gave up. Like, I quit at that point. I thought that this was not for me, I guess,
Wow.
And were it not for another very timely intervention, my roommate at the time had gone to Thailand for I think it was for Christmas. Comes back with like, you can get sets of fire poi in the street markets there, and I mean, these are death trap fire poi. They're like made of like electrical conduit that's been sawed off, and they'll stick, like they'll hold it to like basically dog chains with there'll be split rings like you would use on a keychain, and like the wicking is just cotton, and they're terrible. But he came back after holiday, and it's just kind of like, hey, you wanted to learn how to do this, right? And so I felt really guilty that he'd like brought me a gift. So partially out of a feeling of guilt, I started playing with them again. And it was then that I discovered that there was a regular fire spinning meetup that happened. At that point, I was living in Denver, just down the street from us. So I would go there every Sunday, and that's where I finally found my people. And I found people that could like help me get through those first few speed bumps as a beginner. And that was what finally made it stick, was meeting the other fire spinners in Denver. And the rest, as they say, is history.
This is so important for folks at home to hear, because there's kind of a running theme on the podcast about at this point about people starting poi and feeling like, wow, I suck at this. I'm not good. I'm not coordinated. That's something that I hear a lot. Somebody's like, oh, I'm not coordinated enough to learn that. But what they don't realize is just, you have to get confident and comfortable with your prop, and you have to put in a lot of time, and there's just no avoiding that. So the man himself, Drex, has said it here. He almost gave up on poi very originally. So you at home who are having the struggles of not being able to be good enough, or not feeling like you can get there, you can get there. You just need to put in time. That's all it is. So I very much appreciate hearing that.
Yeah, there's a quote I ran across at one point. Somebody who did yoga, like one of the more common things that people would say to them when they would ask them if they were interested in learning yoga is just like, oh, I'm not flexible enough to do that. And the point is that you do yoga to become flexible. You don't start off that way. And likewise with poi, you don't start off coordinated. Like, the human body does not fundamentally understand the way that poi moves. You have to train how to do it. And so like, you get coordinated by learning how to spin poi. You don't start coordinated. You don't just come out of the womb able to do that.
So when you actually had kind of committed to that point, and you were starting to go to these flow arts jams or poi jams or whatever in Colorado, who were the poi spinners that had influenced you, maybe not even locally, but on like an internet level, or like who were the people that you kind of drew inspiration from during that early period of your life?
Sure. So the guys that I hung out with in Denver, one of them was a dude named Kyle, and he was the guy who first like showed me the basics of crossers, and I fought like hell not to learn. No, just because I saw it and like I instantly understood how much work it was going to be, and I'm just like, I don't want to do all that work. And then I caved and did it another year down the road anyway. But he taught me the basic stuff that I needed to do to get there. There's a guy named Moloch who I want to say like it was his pair of fire poi that I was always borrowing out there. Once it became clear that my own set of fire poi were probably going to get me hurt. This is a great one, actually. So one of the guys out there that I hung out with a lot, his real name is David, but he went by the name Beloved Dragon. And fun fact, Dragon Staff is named after him. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So the short version of this story is that he had a prop that he would bring to these spin jams that was a gigantic rope dart that he made out of chains. And the end of it like had the arrangement that we would expect from Dragon Staff, where there's like the one central wick and then there's the four spokes coming out and everything. We used to call this thing the chandelier because like it was basically just a steel frame that had a bunch of chains wrapped around it.
Interesting.
Yeah, so he took it to Burning Man, and Gora, who is a fire spinner from Hungary, came across this and thought that the design of the wicks was really interesting and decided to try the same thing with a staff and named the staff after the guy he'd gotten the design from. So hence, Dragon Staff. Yeah, as for people that I was following online, at that point, like Nick Woolsey and Zan were like really the only people on YouTube that were doing this regularly. So they were my go-to. Nick Woolsey especially, because as soon as like I got to a certain level, I definitely needed some ideas flowing in from outside of the Denver fire community, and Nick was the go-to for that.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Nick. We were gonna get into him regardless, but yeah, Nick is very integral to my beginnings and my origin as well. Back then we did have our local people just like you did, but at the same time we needed other sources of inspiration, and Nick is just one of the best teachers. I mean, for him to be able to just be so natural and in his element, in the videos that he was making back then, I don't have a lot of words behind it, because if you know what I'm talking about, Nick is just such a beautiful teacher, a beautiful person. And on that subject, Nick actually, correct me if I'm wrong, but in a lot of ways inspired you to start creating tutorials and making tutorials as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, my channel would not exist if it were not for Nick on many, many levels. I have a thing where when I'm watching something and I'm enjoying it, I'm trying to figure out why I'm enjoying it. And I love Nick's tutorials.
So much.
Not just because he's extraordinarily good at breaking down complex ideas and making them accessible, but also too, the way he is on camera is fantastic. Whenever you watch one of his videos, you feel like you're hanging out with a friend. When I started making my own videos, I knew right away, it's like, I also want people to feel like they're hanging out with their friend whenever they watch one of my videos. So that was a major thing that I took from Nick right from day one, because I absolutely understood the relationship he had with his audience, and I wanted to have the same relationship with my audience too. That, and it has to be said that so much of my beginner content, like, there were a lot of videos I put off making for a while because I'm just kind of like, I don't know that I have anything more to say about this than Nick already said. And and spoilers for those of you out there watching right now who've had the same thought go through your head, because I've produced so many tutorials. It's not the content that matters, it's the voice. Like Nick and I can be teaching the exact same thing, but the ways that we think of it and our perspectives on it, like, Nick touches a certain demographic of people and I touch a different demographic of people. There's always been, there's always been this thing. I always encounter this attitude of like, hey, well, all the tutorials are out there. Nobody needs to make those anymore. And it's just like, no, that's not true at all. Nick was already making tutorials when I started, and I didn't steal audience from him. we both grew the community together because I could reach people that he couldn't, and he can reach people that I can't. Because there were more
Love that.
voices doing this, we brought more people in total.
Yeah, and someone's teaching style can very much like fit with someone, right? So like even just apply this to school, right? We all had these teachers that really correlated with the way that we wanted to learn. So I think that's a great comparison. On the subject of Nick, just before we go any further, you definitely so you were able to interview Nick in your Profiles of Poi thing way back in the day. So how, I guess not even that long ago, how 5 or 6 years ago, probably?
That feels like forever ago now, you know? The pandemic kind of changed the way we think of time.
Yeah. So how was that experience for you, interviewing Nick and being able to hang out with him, not even just during the interview, but kind of like backstage behind the camera? Like, tell us about Nick a little bit and that experience, because I feel like I really am curious to hear about that.
Yeah. So I didn't know that Nick was going to be there when that was Mad Skills in Vancouver, and they had booked me to come out, and I don't believe that Nick was on their teaching lineup. I had no idea that he was going to be there. And I was actually teaching my Poi by the numbers class, the one where I'm like, hey, you can learn math through Poi, like, you know, trigonometry and graph theory and things like that. I'll have applications in Poi. And I'm like in the middle of like, this will be a longer story for another time, but like I have this moment in the class where I'm showing off the 7 bridges of Königsberg problem that Leonard Euler solved and created graph theory in the process. And I show people that literally when you draw out Zand's diamond, it's a version of the 7 bridges of Königsberg problem. And literally as I'm doing that, Nick walks down the stairs into the middle of this area where I'm teaching, and I like stop dead in my tracks. I'm like mid-sentence, just like, oh my God. No, it was great. Like poor Nick. I mean, he didn't, that's not what he thought he was doing by walking on in there. So like the moment I'm done with class, like I'm fanboying out like you wouldn't believe. And I'm just kind of like, teach me your ways. And
of course,
he and I spent we spent so much time talking that weekend. It was really glorious, not just in the interview, but like we would go grab dinner together and like we would talk about like, where do you want to go with this? What do you see as being the goal with this in the next 5 years? And we got to know each other like pretty well during the course of that weekend. This is hilarious. Like we actually took an acro class together, and he and I like are completely opposite body types. I'm 6 foot tall and I'm really skinny. And Nick is teeny tiny and he's built like a fire plug. So we were literally the worst partners you could possibly imagine this acro class. We tried our best to make it work, but it must have been really funny watching us try.
That's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
I think the thing that most sticks out to me about that weekend was just, you know, when we talked about the future and how we saw our careers evolving, because even at that time, he was very clearly questioning whether he was going to step back from this. And I think he was kind of curious, like how I keep myself sustained in all of this. Cause you know, he's sometimes had some challenges doing that. He'll step away for a long time. And now of course he's stepped away potentially forever. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's that old thing of never meet your heroes, and good Lord, I'm so glad I met this hero. Like it was fascinating being able to exchange ideas with him and get to know him better that weekend. It was wonderful. That's so
great to hear. And I would be bewildered if I heard anything other than Nick was just a great guy, because he's just such a, like, you hear it, I don't know, back in the day when I was like watching the tutorials, very early days, again, when you really mentioned that it seemed like you were just hanging out with a friend learning, it's very much the vibe that I got from Nick as well. So really glad that we were able to touch on that. Nick is, shout out to you, Nick. I really want to get him on the podcast, hopefully at some point in my life, because he's just such an integral part of my beginnings as well. So, but going back to kind of your earlier days, when did you start going to flow festivals, and which ones did you start attending?
I don't actually remember which one was my first one. I do remember. So within my first year of spinning, I moved to the East Coast, and I encountered. So there's a DJ who was based out of Richmond at the time. His name is Conway Jennings. He wrote the theme song for my channel. Which that was not what it was originally written for. It literally was that thing. I wrote him and was like, "Hey, do you have anything I could use?" And he just sent me an unreleased EP, and he's just like, "Use anything you want off of this." And that was the song that I chose. But yeah, so Conway used to be really big in the flow scene on the East Coast before he went full time as a DJ. And he had gotten an invitation to go to Fire Drums in, I can't remember if this is 2007 or 2008. Probably, I think 2008. Don't quote me on this. Anyway, so he'd received that invitation, and he just, he's like, "Hey, I really like what you're doing. You should come to Fire Drums with me." And at the time, I had to turn him down just because I was still finding my footing at work, and I felt like I needed to focus on things here in DC. So, but it definitely planted the seed in my brain. And I know so the next year I went to both Fire Drums and Wildfire, and I cannot remember which one came first. But what I do remember about those experiences were the people that I met there, which that would have been the year that I met Charlie Cushing. And that's been not just an amazing, kind of co-conspirator in terms of flow arts ideas, but also just like a great friend. He and I still talk on the phone really regularly. We're homies. And I want to say, oh yeah, that was the other cool thing. Like the first year I was at Fire Drums was the year that they had G there. And that was when I first saw plane breaking done in the fashion that we take it for granted right now, but good Lord, I always knew where G was at Fire Drums because there would be a cloud of like 7 or 8 guys that would just like hover around him and go wherever he was, like trying to analyze whatever he was doing.
And you sent us a video of G. So let's just pull this up. You continue talking about him. Let's go ahead and play this. Joey will pull it up and you continue.
Yeah. So this is also just one of my favorite Fire performances of all time. So we take a lot of this for granted, but back then, like the plane breaking stuff that he does, it was like absolutely revolutionary. Nobody had seen anything like it before. And it really, like the biggest thing about it was it took Poi into this 3-dimensional space that, as we've gotten into the YouTube and social media era, for all intents and purposes, Poi and all the flow arts have kind of been flattened because that's what shows up best on camera. We try and keep everything in kind of a 2-dimensional space. But like G had this way of taking Poi into 3 dimensions that worked both in person and on camera. And we are still living in the period that he helped create as a result of that. I don't think that like he came at that from the perspective of like, hey, I'm going to start a revolution or anything like that. I think
it was visionary.
Exactly. I think that was just what he saw in the prop. And, something like this would still kill in Poi chat to this day.
Oh, totally. Dude, yeah.
So 100%. Graceful and like his styles are so technical.
Exactly. And the creative way that he's moving, speed changes, plane changes. And I don't know what year this was released, but I mean, just incredible, groundbreaking stuff. And yeah, you're right. There is so much of a mind-blowing aspect to the first time that you're exposed to 3D, because it's like, okay, we can do flowers on our horizontal plane or our vertical planes, right? Wall plane or wheel plane, but then horizontal plane, you can do in spin, anti-spin extension on horizontal plane as well. So it's it just blows your mind, So I remember
that
very clearly
thing where he did the stall behind his head and came out with a buzzsaw. I do that all the time still to this day.
So sick.
Love it.
That's awesome. Yeah. And these people, that really laid the groundwork for what would be relevant for poi for the next 10, 20, or, you know, however long, many years. I don't know if they would have even realized or thought about it in that way and thought about what they would have created.
I just love that moment right there where he goes from those really rapid changes and then just like kind of stops, like the tension that builds. Cause like, you know, clearly he can just like slay the audience with a bunch of really technical stuff. But the thing I love the most about this is the way that he uses dynamics, the way he'll go really rapid fire with like some really intense stuff. And then boom, he will just stop and give the audience a chance to breathe for a second before he gets into the next salvo. It's so beautiful.
That was beautiful. Based. Yeah, seriously. Yeah, I actually didn't watch this video before you sent it to me, or when you sent it to me. I did not watch this video prior because I did want to have a legitimate reaction to this video live. Yeah. And I will say I missed out on not seeing this earlier because this is truly incredible. What a great artist, especially for the time period. Like, holy shit. Yeah, very good.
And it blows my mind because, like, you know, oh, the bit at the end. Oh, that I wish we had the music, because like the whole thing that I do where I stall to kind of accent the beat, 100% I rip that off from G. That little bit at the end there. What we can't hear is that there's a drum fill that finishes off that song and just boom, 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 boom. He hits every single accent of it. It's like watching him do a drum fill with poi. It's phenomenal.
Well, hey y'all, we'll link that video in the description, so definitely go check that out after or whatever. If you want to take a break now and go watch it, you can do that as well. But yeah, that'll be in the description. Now let's go on to a little bit about your content creation and your journey releasing content. So your content has changed a lot throughout the years. You have obviously pivoted towards different areas as far as tutorials, flow videos, even your long ago videos that you did like at Burning Man or at Fire Drums and all this stuff. Like, I've seen a lot of your shit, so I'm pretty well informed. But tell us a little bit about your journey as a content creator. What successes and failures have you had along the way, and how do you think, like, what lessons have you learned along the way?
Oh my God, so many. I think first and foremost, I should clarify that it was not a plan to become a content creator, because that was not a thing when I started my YouTube channel.
It's true.
No, it's true. It's always weird talking about it now, and people are just kind of like, "Oh, you've been at it forever." And it's like, yeah, I was at it before this was a career for anybody. This was not assured to be a thing that would work when I started. So when I started up my channel, and specifically what started the channel was the tech blog, you know, what inspired that was like three different pieces. The first one being that at the time, so I moved to DC to work in human rights. There was a human rights organization that I worked for my first few years here. And we specifically were involved in trying to stop mass human rights atrocities, genocides, basically. And we had several people that had gotten materials back from us from a number of different conflict areas. I remember Burma and Darfur being two that we would like get video and audio back from, and like people would talk about their experiences. And we were just sitting on all of this media, and that didn't sit right with me, not the least of which because, like, you know, I had come up as a grassroots activist, and I knew how powerful it was for people to feel connections with the people and things that they were working on. And so I tried to sell the organization on starting up a podcast. Haha, full circle there, right? They had some concerns about how much time it was going to take for me to produce a weekly podcast. And I didn't have an answer. I'd never produced regular content before. So
and it's hard.
It is so hard. Goodness, I was not prepared.
Sorry. Yeah, continue.
Yeah, so a piece of it, honestly, was I was trying to figure, like, in my mind, the goal was still to create a podcast with like these stories from Darfur and Burma. But the way to get there was I needed to learn how much time it was, how much of a time commitment it was to produce regular content. So I started producing a weekly video about my poi spinning, partially because I wanted to be able to walk back into the office and be able to say, okay, this is the amount of time it's going to take me every week, so I could get them to greenlight the podcast. That never happened. But another piece of it was that early on in my flow journey, and I've never been able to find this channel again, but I ran across a YouTube channel by a young woman who made a video every week for like 3 months showing off the stuff that she was learning. And I thought it was the coolest thing that she was showing her progress on it. And when it ended, I definitely like kind of felt like, oh, I missed getting to check in with her. And the thought that went through my head was, oh, you know, what if I did the same thing? What if I did a project like this and showed my progress learning? Only it never ended. I just kept going. I just kept going and going. And the third part of it, honestly, was that it motivated me to keep practicing. If I had to produce a weekly video on whatever I was working on, then I had to have something to show off. I refer to this now as a proxy goal, that like and this is not the first time in my life I've done this. I remember when I was trying to make it as a musician in my 20s, I'd read somewhere that like to become a good writer, you should write something every day. And so I remember when I was in the dorms, there was a woman who like lived on the floor above me that I was friends with. And I was just kind of like, you know, hey, can I write a poem on your door every day? And it's funny because she thought that like, she's just like, what's up with this guy? And honestly, in my head, it was literally just like, I just need to feel like I'm going to disappoint somebody if I don't write something every day. Totally arbitrary the way that happened, but you know, it was my proxy goal. It was my motivation to make it happen. So this was my motivation to keep on practicing poi. The tech blog lasted for quite some time, and it became clear to me very early. And so funny thing about that is that when I started producing those videos, I wasn't sharing them anywhere. Because again, in my head, it was just like, this is a thing I'm doing for me. And that was the way it went for several months. And then randomly one day I logged into YouTube and I'd gone from like maybe 4 views on each of those videos to like over 100 on the early ones. I'm like, what happened here? So I opened up the analytics and discovered that Alien John, the god of tech poi himself, had there was a thread on the Home of Poi forums where people were asking about, at the time they were called 1.5s because we eventually switched to calling them 1.5s.
Yeah.
Put the character for half in the title of a YouTube video at the time.
Wow, that is so
it's
funny.
so random. No, it is funny. You go back and you watch those videos from like 2007, 2008 of people talking about this stuff, and they're all still calling them 1.5s. So Alien John had linked to a bunch of my tech blogs on doing 1.5s or 1.5s on the Home of Poi forums, and people had discovered them that way. And all of a sudden I had an audience, which that was not the plan. So
while you're getting through this, Joey, go ahead and pull up the Alien John tech poi video. We'll give him a moment, but keep. I don't mean to keep interrupting you, but I'd love to have some context as far as who Alien John is for those of you who don't know. Okay, so we'll just go ahead and watch that.
Sure. Yeah, totally. If you haven't seen Alien John before, you are in for a treat, friends. My goodness. So at that point, I had more motivation to upload on a regular basis, and I think in my mind, the really big moment for me happened like probably 2 or 3 years in. And I will be the first to admit that most of my early content is garbage. I think I was still trying to figure out what I was doing probably 5 or 6 years into the process. But thanks to everybody who was watching in the meantime, because I have a hard time going back and watching that stuff now. But no, the aha moment for me actually came, I think this would have been 2009 or 2010, where I had traveled to Europe over the summer. My then partner was involved in running a regional burn in Spain called Nowhere. And it turned out that the European Juggling Convention was happening at the same time. And I originally had made plans in my head that I was going to try and work in both of them. And when my partner found out I was doing this, she laid down the law. I was just like, no, because you're not going to make it to the burn if you go to IGC. EJC, excuse me.
Yeah.
So afterwards, everybody was like pooling up in Barcelona, and I ran into Alien John randomly on the street there, of all things, and he showed me some stuff that he learned from G at EJC, and it was like some of the diagonal plane stuff that G started working with later on in his career. And when I came back to DC, I did a video all about that. And there was something that clicked in my head where I recognized that not everybody had the means, like very few people had the means to go to Spain and like run into Alien John on the street. And not the least of which because neither G nor Alien John were producing regular content at that point. And so, yes, the Arizona transmission video.
The grainy Arizona 2008 quality.
Oh, still, I think the greatest Tech Boy video ever made, which it's up there. Like Red Pants definitely gives this one a run for its money, but like it was
a collaborative effort by Zan and Alien John, and God damn it, they had a lot of fun, and they had so much new shit to show people. So yeah, this is we'll just go ahead and let this
Zan's
play
Diamond.
For a moment, but
that segment right there is why we call it Zan's Diamond. He didn't make that up. Surreal created Zan's Diamond.
Zan just popularized it because he was so goddamn good at it.
And I would run into Zan at fire festivals, and he was baffled that it got named after him. He's just like, I wasn't the first one to do this. I'm not even the one who does it most often. I don't know why this happened. Anyway, so the plane bending and
all the fun stuff here.
The transition.
And okay, specifically, so your profiles in Poi that you did with Alien John, you really did him so much. You gave him so much credit that he deserved, right? And because this video is very revolutionary, and I would agree with you. I mean, for the relevance that it still has to this day is truly incredible. And when Alien John was referring to like I don't know the specifics, I'm going to butcher this, but when he was creating the little graphics, the one that had just kind of played out, and he was discovering that, wow, these are actually applicable and we can trace. I mean, he just took such a different approach to this, you know, it was very groundbreaking, very ahead of his time. So shout out to Alien John for sure.
One of the big OGs, and, you know, it's also one of those things that we kind of take it for granted now, but there was definitely a period in poi spinning when the idea of picturing the trails that the poi would leave over time, which is just like, you know, so integral to how we think of tech poi, was still pretty unusual. And producing this video and showing all of this in action, like people had been writing about this stuff in online forums for years, but writing out what you're doing is kind of a difficult thing in so many of these cases. You'd write out instructions for something and somebody might come up with something completely different. And this was the first time so many of us had actually seen the atomic weave. Yeah, one of those things that's unfortunately we don't get a lot of anymore.
No, we don't.
Yeah, but
we don't.
This is the first time most of us had seen all this stuff done. And I remember this came out right about the time when I'd finished up Nick's beginner series on his channel, and I thought at the time I definitely thought, I was like, okay, cool, you know, I know the world of poi, I'm good. And then this came out and it was like, oh snap, we're off to the
blown away. Yeah, on the topic of atomic weaves, I find them to be very interesting and very cool because I love poi. But as far as a technical, as far as an audience member viewing something that is visually appealing, to be quite frankly, I've never found atomic weaves to be like visually appealing. They're so abstract. So abstract. But I think they've kind of have become less popular / relevant because of the kind of aesthetic appealing nature of atomic weaves. And this is all personal preference, but that's kind of where I stand on it.
So I think of them as fitting kind of in the same box as toroids in some respects, in that
very much.
Yeah, because they kind of shift what poi does, so it stops being about the curved patterns that we produce, like we're emulating a spirograph, and suddenly they turn poi into straight lines. And the difficulty there is that you can hide the fact that your planes are not super straight if they're seen in profile at all times. Like, but like when you switch into doing atomics or toroids, all of the sudden, if you have any, and I do mean any, jitters in your planes whatsoever, it becomes painfully obvious to everybody. And the technique to clean that up takes so long, and it is so time intensive, and it's so easy to just not do it, to just stay in like, you know, flattened 2D land rather than playing around with 3D. But
yeah,
people who can really make it work, like, it's stunning. There's a guy who he used to be part of the flow scene here in DC, Eric. He's E6 of 1 on YouTube, and you can go back and look at some of his stuff. And man, for the longest time, of course, a lot of us were looking at toroids, and we just kind of thought of them as being a bit of a curiosity. And then Eric came out with a video where he was showing off toroid caps, and all of a sudden it just clicked. I'm like, oh, that's what this can be. That's what this can look like. And I've been working on that off and on through the years, but one of my great regrets, definitely when that first kind of spike of tech poi kind of came to an end, was that we never really got the chance to refine toroids on a mass level and see what could happen there. But
absolutely. So, and on the topic of tech poi, we've kind of discussed this a little bit offline before, but as we've seen new waves of tech poi and the new way of approaching spinning throughout the years, aside from the Vulcan tech gospel,
shout out to Aurora, who is spinning on screen right now and is one of those OGs that we do not talk about nearly often enough.
The double staff sleigh. So on the topic of tech poi, like I said, aside from Vulcan tech gospel, what are some of the newer ideas and new trends in poi spinning that you enjoy, such as, like, for example, the popularization of gunslingers I would say by Jonathan Alvarez, and the contact poi movement created by Ronan? Like, what are some of the more like interesting ideas that have been, you know, kind of come along in the last few years that you love? Can you speak to any of those?
Sure. I mean, gunslingers are definitely the big one. Yeah, so gunslingers I find really fascinating because they're essentially the same idea as Meteor, except twice as fast. And I avoided learning them for the longest time. Like, I've known John Alvarez since he was 16, and I remember when he was developing the kind of basic tenets of gunslingers, and I remember seeing it and just being like, "Yeah, not for me." And what changed that for me actually was there's a poi spinner. I want to say his name is Aoi Kondo, and
Japanese poi spinner.
Yeah, he had I've got this video saved on my phone. I've like watched this frame by frame more times than I can count. And
it's so good.
There was a video he did where he did an anti-spin flower with his gunslingers. And this just blew my mind. Like, because number one, the technique of taking those weaves and, you know, doing something with them other than just like spiral wraps and coming in and out of it, like, you can definitely see John Alvarez has a background in glow stringing when you look at a lot of the stuff that he does with gunslingers. But
absolutely,
Aoi had recontextualized gunslingers into such a way that all of a sudden, all of the theory that we have for Vulcan tech gospel now applies to gunslingers as well. And that resulted in me giving myself basically gunslinger boot camp, where I wanted to get to the point where I could do anti-spin gunslingers in split time opposites, just because I mean, I think anti-spin split time opposites is always the coolest looking variation on anything. And it took me 3 months of really intense work, but I actually got it down on Christmas Eve that year. And, you know, since then, of course, exploring gunslingers and every timing and direction, utilizing spiral wraps in a way that it's not just I'm going to park myself in spiral wraps for a little while. I'm going to actively make them a part of the hand movements. That is all still in process for me, and stuff that I'm practicing on it still on a daily basis now, because it's really hard. Definitely when we started opening ourselves up, this takes us back a couple steps, but when we opened ourselves up to meteor grips, that was a pretty big development in the poi world, because when I first started, we strapped our poi to our fingers, like the
the little finger loops.
Ball handles didn't become popular until I've been doing this for years. And also too, like I don't know. So some of the stuff that inspired
this is the video you're referencing, correct?
That's the video.
Yeah.
That's the video.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. No, the bit where he does it is coming up here. Yeah, that right there. Like, seriously, like, the moment that dropped in the video, I'm just kind of
like, mirrored.
Excuse me, what?
Yeah,
and mirrored. We were off to the races. Oh my God. Now that he could do it with both hands, and like that is still the ideal version of that hybrid. I have tried it many different ways, and that is definitely the ideal version of that hybrid. And the thing I love most about that is I am legendary for my love of anti-brids, and there's definitely pieces of anti-brid technique that comes into that specific hybrid, because Absolutely. Of course you've got a point of contact between one hand and like it's the middle of the tether with the other poi. So it comes off as having the same visual effect as an anti-brid, even though it's really not. It's pretty slick like that.
It's so cool. So cool. So I do want to transition into a new topic. Let's talk about three poi. So over the years, there has been some sentiment, which I will agree with. First of all, before we even get into the conversation, I agree with the statement that you made. Okay, so this is not any hate.
Okay.
But you said, quote, I would rather be clean with 2 than sloppy with 3. And like I said, I do agree with this. However, nowadays that there are people who have fleshed out the ideas enough, and we are further along with 3 poi, and we are like evolved enough as a community that people are doing it very cleanly with 3. What's kind of held you back from pursuing 3 at a high level, and kind of what are your thoughts on that as a whole?
Well, so first and foremost, I think that I mean, I did explore 3 poi for a while. There's that video I did back in the day on 3 poi tribrids, which as many people as I see doing 3 poi these days, it's still pretty rare to see people doing tribrids. So I think that work still really holds up. But honestly, like, and there are some people that I do enjoy doing 3 poi. Like, again, John Alvarez is fantastic. AOE Kondo's work is phenomenal. I'm trying to remember what his real name is. His Instagram is Pum Pum Joe. He's a Taiwanese.
He's incredible. He's incredible.
Yeah. Amazing work. Yeah. Clean as can be in everything that he does.
Absolutely.
So there are definitely 3 poi spinners that I follow, but I think that like, part of that statement was really like a lot of that question. I get asked that question so much. Like, people are like, why aren't you doing 3 poi? Why aren't you doing 3 poi? And like, the honest answer is like, I kind of explored it, and I found the stuff that, I thought was interesting, and I just have other stuff that interests me more. And part of it too was, me interrogating myself and being like, you never watch 3 poi videos, with those exceptions, of course, or there's a lot of content that gets uploaded with 3 poi videos, especially in like poi chat, and kind of challenging myself and asking myself, it's like, why is this something that doesn't interest you? And I realized that a lot of what I was seeing was, and this was a bad habit that we had back in the kind of first wave of tech poi at the end of the 2000s. And, something that I look back on and I wish that I had done differently was like, in our minds, it was more about demonstrating the idea than it was making it like accessible. So somebody who knows nothing about poi could see this thing and understand that something cool was going on. In so many cases, it just like it's only people that already are on the inside that will understand what you're trying to do. And in the meantime, to
Sure.
anybody else, it just looks like gobbledygook. And so,
Yeah, and I will say, like, when I've said this on the podcast several times, but when ⴃ was in its infancy, nobody was doing it well. That's how I feel. Like, nobody was doing it well. So I resisted against doing ⴃ for a long time. I have been spinning poi since 2007. I only got into poi in what, like 2020, ⴃ into 2020. I mean, so very recently, in the grand scheme of things. And I had seen some ⴃ that inspired me to start. And when I first started, man, I was so fucking bad with it. It was, just me looking at myself. Right. But now I have gotten to a level with ⴃ. And I like, it just makes me very inspired and happy and proud, and like it's a whole different, it scratches a different itch in my brain, right? So like ⴃ is like my comfort zone, and ⴃ is where I'm like want to take things to another level, because I've loved contact poi for so long, and I've loved the flowers for so long, and all these like ideas that are very familiar to us at this point. And I feel like I've taken ⴃ to a level where I'm like excitedly incorporating contact and flowers and isolations and all these things into a mix where, like, my ⴃ, I feel very ultimately satisfied with ⴃ. But it took a long time for us to get there as a community. Like, it,
sure.
Again, I was on the very same sentiment as you, when, making that comment or whatever. But I felt a very similar way, and it's hard to make ⴃ look good.
Well, and the other piece of that, of course, is like I was saying, we definitely set the pace of that during the first wave of tech poi. Like, I say the first, and there's probably some people that are going to contest that. We'll call it we'll call it wave 1.5, shall we? And it's because, of course, we had that same bad habit back then. And I think one of those things that really dawned on me at a certain point was like, you have all these tricks that you can do, but can you make them look good? And I realized that I still had so much work to do with 2 poi. And at that point, it's like, I mean, maybe someday with 3 poi, but like, I still have so much work to do with 2 poi here. Like, we'll see what and if I get there,
Yeah, and it really just goes, I mean, I've said this, I think one other or twice other times on the podcast before, but I believe there's infinite amount of things to do with 2 poi, right? So we are always going to be closer to 0 than we are to infinity. No matter how large the number is, no matter how much we know, there's always more to be discovered with 2. So it's not a bad approach to be like, okay, well, I still want to focus on 2, even though people are doing things with 3. It really boils down to what you want to do. And I feel like you need to follow your intuition and decide on whether or not you want your focus to be with 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever the fuck you want to do. You need to just trust the things that you like and the things that you enjoy. So very much agree on that.
Shoot. Sorry. I just realized I never finished that story from earlier about
Please continue.
Stuff. Yeah. Sorry for those of you who've been watching this, waiting for the tail end of that story for I don't know how long we've been going on here, but yeah. So the diagonal plane stuff I learned from Alien John in Barcelona. So it dawned on me that, like, not everybody can go to Barcelona. Not everybody can like learn from Alien John and G, and they're not making that stuff widely available just now. So it dawned on me that by posting a video of that stuff, I was doing a service. I was in a unique position to be able to do something that was going to benefit other people's worlds. And as soon as I realized that my channel could be a service to others, that really changed the game for me. That kind of became the primary motivating factor behind most of what I create. And of course, it's evolved over time. The tech blog, of course, ended partially because I was bored with the idea, and partially just because at that point, smartphones had become so widespread, it just felt unnecessary. Everybody could upload the stuff that they were working on. But, started producing my own beginner tutorials, which I held off doing for a long time because I didn't want to disrespect Nick. And I didn't realize until I started doing them that it meant that we get more people total rather than competing head on with them. And of course, switching into the, profiles in poi literally came about because I had all my old DVDs from the days that we had DVDs, and I realized that the only things that I would go back and watch on the regular were the interviews with the artists. And I'm just like, hey, why not just do that and have it not live on a DVD? And of course, more recently, there's been more of an emphasis on dance and kind of like talking people through individual topics and techniques for them to practice. So, I mean, a part of it, honestly, is I kind of keep looking for new ways to approach, how I can serve the community. And that means that I experiment with a lot of different formats, and some of them stick and some of them don't. And
Right.
some are real popular for a while, and some of them I try it once and I'm just like, nope, that didn't work for anybody.
It's a part of being a creator, and experimenting with also what you want to do, and then what you think could be appealing or applicable to the whole sphere of knowledge. And I don't mean to cut you off with the story, but something I do really want to get into is the whole, like, how do you define tech poi? What would you say is like roughly your definition of tech poi?
Sure. So at least the version of tech poi that I thought of myself as being a part of back in the early 2000s or late 2000s and early 2010s was essentially a systematic way of looking at poi that parameterized everything. It essentially turned poi into systems and math. And the drive there was to essentially use those systems to both classify the things we already knew how to do and to anticipate the things that we hadn't created just yet. Alien John in the Profiles in Poi interview I did with him, of course, gives a great example of this, where he very literally did this. And, those computer simulations that we saw in the Arizona transmission video, the first time he did a cat eye, it literally was just, he had created a system inside his computer using a 3D animator, where he was exploring all the different things, like all the things that you could do with hybrids, and discovered that like extensions and isolations were basically the same thing, but phased in different directions. And he literally just flipped an extension over on itself and out popped a cat eye. And he had a moment of looking at it. He's like, is that something that I can do? So I think that was really the mold of what tech poi was then. And I think there's plenty of people that still call themselves tech poi spinners to this day, but it's used in a different context, I think. It's less about creating frameworks or, thinking of poi in terms of math. And it becomes more like, I want to... I want to put my mark on things, and here's a bunch of fun tricks that I can do with static rope, or here's all these juggling patterns applied to poi, and let me be clear in saying that I think if people are enjoying the challenges, then that's the most important thing. But yeah, it definitely feels different to me than what tech poi felt like to me back in the late 2000s.
Of course, because there's a different phase, and there's different waves, and there's different kind of places that we are as a community. And we've had even I disagreed with you publicly on it was a video that you made that said like what killed tech poi, right? And so in my mind, and this is the reason that I bring up the whole tech poi definition thing, because tech poi for me, in my mind, would be something that is constantly evolving. It's essentially new grounds and new discoveries in poi, right? So that's kind of loosely what I would define tech poi as, is new information, new frameworks, because I don't think that, again, this goes back to the whole infinite possibility thing. I don't think that we're even close in discovering the frameworks that are out there, as far as tech as like contact poi, mixing with weaves, and like I'm even creating things that I have not been done before. So I think tech poi can be very in my mind, again, this is my opinion, but I think tech poi is very much so ever evolving, right?
Yeah, and to be clear here, language is a thing that evolves over time, and I think that it is safe to say that what I understood to be tech poi when I was coming up is something that's no longer practiced as much. but that doesn't mean that the words that we use to describe what we were doing can't evolve to have a new context in the modern era. I would also just like to point out, though, that when we talk about tech poi in that context, there's a really, really specific version of those new poi movements that we're talking about. So one of my favorite poi spinners to watch is ᴅᴜᴜᴜᴅᴜᴜ. She is, I want to say, I can't remember what country she's from, but she's a poi dancer who posts a lot of stuff on Instagram. And she's one of my favorite people to watch because the way that she fuses together modern dance and poi just makes it feel like the two were made for each other. And it is something that I have struggled so hard and so long on, that seeing her make it look that effortless is amazing. And yet she's not seen as tech poi.
Some people would see her that way. But yeah, I again, it kind of goes back to like, you made a very good point as far as like what tech poi is and kind of like the nuances of that. But yeah, I mean, she's doing new things that are innovative, and like we're always going to be to a point where there are new things to be discovered, and she's doing it in a way that hasn't been done before. And we all have these little inclinations to do poi, and our approaches are always going to be different than the next person, even though we might look similar to a certain person. But she's a perfect example of this because, you know, her three poi is so dynamic, so creative, and she's doing it in the way that she's moving her body. She's not static the whole time in the way that she's spinning. You know, she's presenting it very well physically.
Yeah, there's a great video of her from, I want to say it's like 3 or 4 years ago, where she's got a set of sock poi and she's exploring groundwork with the sock poi. And I still go back to that video to this day and trying to figure out how exactly she's making the momentum in it work. But the reason I bring that up is just, you know, when we talk about what's groundbreaking in poi and we make tech poi synonymous with that, there's also a choice that's being made there in terms of what's being seen as groundbreaking inside of that box. And I think it's important for us to maybe have a little bit of a conversation about what goes in the box and what doesn't, and why the things that don't go in the box are not put in there. Because I think that there's a load of really groundbreaking stuff going on out there, but a lot of people wouldn't call it tech poi. And I think it's worth having the conversation as to what does go in the box then and why.
Sure. Yeah, I could, and I could agree with that. A topic that has become relevant over the last month or so has been in regards to juggling and flow arts. So it's kind of like spurred this episode in happening in a way, because you had some commentary on the episode with Bo Juggler and on the significance behind flow arts and juggling. So I want you to walk me through a little bit about the kind of disdain that you had a little bit as far as the opinion that Bo had, like, if you would.
Sure. Like, so if we want to get into specifics on this, like, people are allowed to like what they like. I think that, you know, we all only have so much time on this earth, and I hope that we all find ways to devote that time to things that bring us more joy being here. And there's a variety of ways that people do that. I think that we start getting into sketchier territory when we insinuate that we do a thing because it has some quality that we consider better than, or that another thing is lacking. That, you know, it's one thing to say, hey, I love juggling. I think juggling is awesome. And to that, I'd say, absolutely. Heck yeah. I want to see you do more of it then. And it's another to kind of come into it and say, I like juggling because, you know, it's bigger than flow arts. And at that point, I'm just like, you don't need to take that next step there, friend. That, like, you can like the thing because you like it, and as well you should. But, like, you know, when there's a piece of that makes one thing seem better than another, I think that we've kind of we need to step back a little bit there, you know?
Well, and there's been a lot of controversy and discussions over the years based on, flow artists. Like poi spinners have kind of been on the like butt end of the joke for jugglers for a long time, and
Sure have.
we've talked about that in a lot of times. But I think Bo is a particular case where he has a very different approach, and he's kind of just not necessarily identifying with the term flow arts, but he's not saying he's not like, okay, sorry, he has said that he's not a flow artist, excuse me, but he is more taking the approach of flow arts is just a smaller category as far as like let's say that juggling is an umbrella and flow arts is like one part under, and he's not necessarily saying, this is my interpretation of the argument, is that he's not saying it's lesser or more important. He's just saying that it's one side of juggling, and he actually considers poi spinning to be juggling in a lot of ways. And I wanted to ask you your opinion on this. Do you consider poi spinning to be juggling?
No, never have. I mean, all of us encountered juggling growing up, and again, I think it's cool, but just not a thing I was ever. I love watching gymnastics when we have the Olympics come around. I've never had the inclination to try and pick it up myself, And no, I there's a few pieces in there because I think that the act of saying that flow arts is a subset of juggling is in and of itself saying that I am part of the superior category. I am part of the umbrella, and you all are just derivative from us. That in itself is kind of the act of saying this is lesser than.
You're just saying it's a different thing, right? You're saying it's different, right?
Well, yeah, definitely. And like, I actually have a video in the works right now on this. It's the script is getting way out of control. I need to do significant editing because it's way too long. But no, I mean, because I honestly think that flow arts is a useful term for describing a movement towards having a specific relationship culturally with a prop that for all intents and purposes kind of comes out of the United States in late 90s, early 2000s. And it's something that, I think these terms are useful in the same way that we use the word impressionism to describe a bunch of people that were artists that all kind of coexisted and knew each other and, influenced each other a bit. And at the same time, there's a lot that comes under that. But fundamentally, we use these labels to kind of pull together something that is a shared experience and a moment in time to be able to talk about it with ease. And I think that flow arts absolutely serves that purpose. I think that it does a great job of, and the fact that the term had to be invented in the first place, there was a culture there that had to be described.
Absolutely, because it wasn't traditional. It wasn't traditional juggling in the way that juggling is, again, traditionally seen. So I think that the term flow arts is definitely has relevance and it has importance based on exactly what we're doing, right? So I think, and I do a little bit more understand your perspective on saying that it's a subcategory, therefore it makes it seem lesser. I get what you're saying. One thing that I would encourage folks, if you're kind of weighing in on this conversation and you're engaged on what we're talking about here, I want you to listen to the entire thing on Bo, because there was a lot of talks about like what the flow state is and how that's applicable and how good that is. And I think it's just boils down to a cultural difference between like, again, you mentioned like the United States being at the forefront of the whole flow arts thing, right? And I think it's important to realize that in the same sense that flow arts is integral to the United States, juggling is very integral to the European culture, and it's very much very broad, right? So they don't really like, even though he might be spinning two poi, he would be engaging in what he thinks is kind of a juggling like mindset. And there's room for debate on this, which is, I think that this is why a topic has been talked about and why it's relevant, and why it's important to discuss for sure.
Well, so sorry, I'm going to push back on one point there, because like if Europeans saw poi spinning as a form of juggling, there would be more than 2 poi spinners that had made the top 10 jugglers list in the past decade. I think I just lost your audio, by the way.
Can you hear me?
Now I've got audio. Hooray!
Okay. All right. Sorry, y'all. All right.
I didn't mean
we lost
for that.
audio. Okay. No, we'll actually
People are
we'll
gonna watch
this
this on the replay and just be like, "Oh shit."
we lost audio for a sec, y'all, but he made a funny comment. He said that mic drop was so serious we lost audio for real. Okay, so going back into the topic, so I'd like to hear you expand a little bit about that. So I know that you have more to say about juggling and of course flow arts and kind of like the ways that we intertwine and the differences among the communities. So like, if you would just please expand a little bit on that.
Sure. That's kind of broad.
I know it's so broad. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that juggling is a sister art for sure. There's a lot of different movement arts out there that incorporate prop spinning. And I think, you know, they all are very beautiful in their own ways. Good Lord. Have you checked out some of the stuff that's coming out of like the yo-yo scene right now? Like there's so many poi tricks that are getting integrated into yo-yos right now. It's ridiculous. It looks really cool. There are people doing yo-yo gunslingers. It's wild.
And really quick, sorry to interrupt you, but so just for y'all at home that might think Drex is a little bit of a juggling hater, okay? I know that you're not. Okay, but you actually sent me a video.
I did
about juggling that you wanted to watch. So we'll just go ahead and play that, and you can continue to talk about, you know, the kind of subset of flow arts and kind of like, I do think it's a different thing. And I think there's room for discussion and debate based on, is he juggling? Is he doing flow arts? Like, what are those so different?
And they can
like
overlap. They can overlap. You can be doing both. You can be both. Like, you know, there's so many cases where people will overlap martial arts and flow arts. There will be cases like it's not impossible to live in places where you're in a Venn diagram between these two things. Mm-hmm. I just think that it's important to recognize that, you know, there are some people that are drawn to one, there are some people that are drawn to the other, and they can coexist in harmony. That's fine.
And you could be doing both, right?
Yeah,
I think as far as myself goes, like I feel like I am engaging in both juggling and flow arts on occasion when I'm in a flow state with juggling, and I feel like I'm again engaging in both, and I'm kind of it is a very Venn diagram type thing where it's like, okay, where's the line here? So I don't blame you with having a different kind of side and a different argument as far as like what flow arts is, and kind of like standing up for flow arts in a lot of ways, and like what you're saying culturally, because again, I think it boils down. Yeah, and I'm sorry, do you know who the juggler is right here?
This is Patrick Elnert. So yeah, this Elnert with a T.
Okay.
I adore this performance, and I'm going to plant a little question in our discussion here that I for when we get to the end of this video here.
Please,
and that question is, what is the largest prop that he manipulates in the course of this video?
Are you talking physically?
Yes.
Okay, physically. Okay, interesting.
So
go ahead.
Well, so okay. we've already talked a little bit here about the kind of microaggressions that poi spinners get from jugglers, and I wish that we could say that that's past tense, and it's not. Like, it's still an easy joke for jugglers to make, is like, oh, so and so tricked me into liking poi, where it's like, if we're the punchline, that kind of sucks. I think part of the reason that Flow Arts exists as a label is it's a safe place for us to be able to explore this and feel pride about it. It is a place where we get to look at what we do and not have to feel ashamed of it, not have to feel like we're lesser than. And that's part of what I love about Flow Arts, because I actually did not like the term at all when it first emerged, because I don't flow when I spin poi usually. And I thought it was ridiculous to include the word flow in the title for what we do. And over time, what I realized is, like, language is such a funny thing, because sometimes what it defines is not necessarily what you think it does. And sometimes you just come up with a word that is a handy thing, like punk rock music. Punk is, if memory serves, punk is an Algonquin word, and it has nothing to do with what punk rock music is about. But it was just a handy word to have to describe a culture that emerged in the late 70s.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
And just while we're on that topic, I do have to point out that Bo was very, in later parts of the interview, was very much so in favor of, I would never tell anybody that what they are doing is lame or lesser than, because what they're doing, like, if some guy over here doing dragon staff, like, I want you to do that, and it's all kind of a part of the same object manipulation sphere of what we're doing, and playing with an object, having a prop, having a relationship with what we're doing. Incredible video. Sorry, I can't even not talk about it, but
I know, right?
But I think Bo is one of those jugglers that we really need in the flow arts world, right? Because he's so encompassing and inclusive, based on, people doing poi spinning and juggling, and he's very much so is just kind of pointing out the differences behind his approach and the rest of the, like, traditional poi spinning world. And I think that there is a difference, and you as well have said that he's in fact not a flow artist, because he's approaching it in a very juggling mindset way. So I think there's room for both, right?
Well, and specifically, I think that he's a juggler because that's what he wants to be called. Like, that's the most important question to me, is where does your, oh, that was such a sick leap. I think ultimately what it comes down to is what resonates with you. What is the term that you feel like identifies you? And, again, like, if juggling makes you happy, then do juggling. Absolutely. Flow arts makes me happy. And I love that I get to do it on a regular basis. But there's something to me that, yes, this is my favorite part. I love this. Wait for it. Yes. It's like a Rube Goldberg machine. I love it.
Dude, what?
And wait. Here it comes. Yeah.
That was so fucking cool. Holy. That was, I, again, have not watched this video because I wanted to have a legitimate reaction to this. That was very special. Incredible.
Yeah.
And the multi-prop talent, I mean, rings, clubs. Wow. This is very, very, very incredible. I wonder where this was performed. Do you know off the top of your head?
I can't remember, I'm afraid. I think it's in the title of the video, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
We'll go ahead and link this video, of course, in the description. But these cultural differences between the traditional circus jugglers, whether it be rings or clubs or balls, I think expressed is that we have so much more commonalities than we do differences, and I want there to be more inclusion and more collaboration between jugglers and flow artists, whether you want to call this person a juggler or this person a flow artist. Like, we need to learn from each other and take what we can from each other and apply them in ways that make us happy. And I feel like that's just what we should be aiming towards, right?
Yes, and so yes to collaborations, yes to exchanging ideas. I think that also has to come from a place of respect, though. Like,
I would agree.
so here's the thing. Like, there's a conversation about, how we get more poi spinners in the juggling world, how we get jugglers to recognize what we do as poi spinners. And that was really cute. I love that. I love that little somersault there. I think that's the end of the performance. Yeah, it is.
That was beautiful.
Yeah. So real quickly before I return to the question that started this, so I hear a lot less talk about how do we create an inclusive environment to bring glow stringers into the poi world, because there's plenty of poi spinners that don't think of glow stringing as poi.
Even they are the subset of a subset. They're poor glow stringers, dude.
Right,
They're just fucking the outcasts of the outcasts, bro. Like,
or even like traditional Maori poi, which arguably there's no type of prop spinning out there that has more in common with us than Maori poi does. It's where we get the name from.
Right.
And this this will be the soundbite that gets thrown around here, but ultimately, so the problem that I ultimately see is that there's kind of this artificial system that's been created where juggling is considered the top of the heap, and in a lot of respects, I think poi spinners want to be seen as real and legitimate by jugglers because jugglers have created this kind of system in which they're sitting at the top. And I think it's way more powerful for us to look at how jugglers make us feel in terms of like mocking poi as a prop, and think about, when do we do that? When do we look at glow stringers and just be like, no, those are just kids messing around with lights on strings? And I think that there's something really powerful in starting with being our own example of that and thinking less about how do we impress the people who've appointed themselves to be at the top, and more, how can we be inclusive of the people that are looking for this respect from us?
I think that's a really, really good soundbite, and I think that's a good quote, because I do agree with you in a lot of ways. There's so much that we can learn from each other, but at the end of the day, there is a difference behind what we're doing, right? So juggler, like I see Bo's perspective, I see your perspective, and I kind of am somewhere in the middle where, like, I am a poi spinner, man. Like, I am somebody who focused on flowers, focused on 3D, focused on 2-poi, and still focus on 2-poi. And I don't think 3-poi is all that there should be behind flow arts and poi spinning, obviously. And there's so much that you have to be very dedicated on. As far as execution, drilling, all these things that are very difficult about flower patterns, contact patterns, 3D manipulation, all these things that require a very significant technical and very like holistic approach behind what we're doing. Like we're not just flowing with 2-poi, right? There's specific movements that we are trying to accomplish in the same way that jugglers are trying to accomplish specific things. So I don't think categorizing flow arts just as a flow state I don't think that's a fair definition, because flow arts, like you were saying, based on language, is very a broad term that is focused around, movement and whatever, I won't give a fair definition of flow arts off the top of my head, but yeah, I see what you're saying, and I have a more respectful viewpoint based on the point that you were trying to make, and I do agree with you in some sense. The only caveat is that I do not think Bo is the point of contention that should be talked about, because he's very understanding of like he even commented on like Tim Goddard's approach of poi spinning and saying that he very much appreciated the way that Tim is just spinning only, no contact, no tosses, just pattern based only. So he's one of those hybrid people that that sees juggling for what it is, and then also sees like, you know, his own version of poi spinning and the tech behind that. So I will agree with your sentiment behind the juggling culture that has been kind of at the forefront of like poi spinners, and like with the way that we feel about jugglers and the kind of the contentious relationship, because not to get too far off topic, but in the early days of my poi spinning career, Wyatt, I'm gonna bring you up, dude. I saw Wyatt Davis he was wearing a shirt that said pointless, but like poi was capitalized. And I'm
Oh
like,
my
how dare you?
God.
How dare you? Right? Because it was like, that just kind of like embodies like, don't fucking give up on your origins, Wyatt, you know? So it's like, there has like, people want to deny there being contentious relationships between like poi spinners and jugglers, but like, dude, there absolutely is. Like, you can't just say like there is. There absolutely is.
Yeah, and I mean, so in a certain respect, yes, I absolutely agree that, you know, Bo's position is not among the more offensive positions that I have encountered in the juggler world. And certainly there is definitely a decade and a half worth of taking microaggressions that kind of came out in that reply. But also at the same time,
I understand that.
yeah. And at the same time, like, I think also too, it's one of those things, like, so to the best of my knowledge, Bo and I are on friendly terms. Like, we've talked online several times.
He had things to say about you as well, but just briefly. And
that's just it. I like him as a person. I think I think he's really talented. We've worked together on a couple projects. I enjoyed working with him. You know, it's one of those things that, like, I think part of that was coming from a place where it's like, this is a guy that I like and trust. And sometimes it hurts more when the people who are closest to you say the things that hurt, you know? And it becomes that thing where it's just like, you know, I'm not saying, when I push back on that stuff, it's not me being all like, you know, oh, Bo, you're a terrible person. It's like, no,
I understand.
I like you and I want to continue inhabiting spaces with you, but we need to have this conversation, because those spaces aren't going to be safe unless you recognize why this is harmful.
And there is a respect factor that boils down to what we're doing as far as 2 poi, right? Not even just 3, like 2 poi. I can guarantee you that nobody would be able to do the things with 2 poi that I'm doing unless they tried it. And that's just what it is. There takes a significant amount of time and dedication, in the same way that you have to dedicate time and yourself to juggling. You have to dedicate that same thing towards 2 poi, because it's a separate thing. It's completely different. It is different, right? And I think there's, again, the argument of it falling under the same sphere of object manipulation as a whole, and I kind of more agree with that term. But yeah, I would agree with you, and I think there's points to be made on both ends for sure. So I understand what you're saying to a greater length based on talking to you and hearing you expand a little bit more on that issue.
Cool. And also, just to make sure that it is explicit, like, Bo, if you're watching out there, dude, like, I'm not mad at you. Like, yeah,
we love you, Bo.
Yeah, dude, like, you produce really great work, and I'm glad you're in the
community.
Of course.
Yeah.
I am also one of those people that, like, when my friends fuck up, I tell them, dude, you done fucked up.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a healthy approach towards addressing differences that we have as artists and differences that we have as people. So very much appreciate you touching on that issue. And we want to go ahead.
So I asked you a question at the beginning of that.
Oh, shit.
So can you tell me, what was the largest object that he manipulated in that performance?
I'm like thinking about like volume, and also like maybe rings. I don't know, like volume. I don't know. We'll say clubs. I don't know. Okay. Clubs.
The largest prop that he manipulates in the course of that performance is the stage. What I love the most about that performance is it is so dependent on the space that it happens in. Like that bit at the end where he's rolling the clubs and he's setting himself up to catch that ring on his forehead, that only works because he knows the space in so much detail that he is able to put those pieces together into that Rube Goldberg machine. What I love so much about this is like, no, so there's this idea in that I've encountered in several art circles now that, like, you know, when you see masters of their craft come at something, they can do it in one of two ways. It's either, you know, they have a central message that they want to get across to their audience. Like, you know, if you go and listen to Green Day's American Idiot album, it's a bunch of punk rock music about like how suburban alienation has led us into the Iraq War. And there's also types of art that exist specifically to show what art is capable of. And that's what I see in Patrick Elmert's performance there. He shows people exactly how far you can take the idea of object manipulation to the point where he makes the environment that he's in the object that he's manipulating. He takes that idea so far, and I love it.
That is such a good reference, and I very much appreciate that you had. I didn't even know what to say, so that's very, very good.
I know that was kind of an unfair question.
No, it's fair. It's fair. No, yeah. The stage and the space that he is manipulating. I mean, he very much so. It's applicable to the argument that you would be making. Yeah, I very much agree with that. So I want to get into a topic. Joey actually has a segment where he is able to ask the question that fans write in, and they are asking questions. So we're going to turn it over to Joey and let him ask the question that was asked based on a fan response on my Instagram story. So we'll go ahead and let Joey ask that question whenever he's ready.
All right, let's let rip. Hey, how you doing?
Good. So I got a question from Trayvon. Excuse me if I butcher your at Trayvon Stowers, I think. He asked, how does one film a good poi video? Are the moves rehearsed or freestyled, and what angles look good?
Goodness. How much time we got here? So honestly, what makes a good
You take your time and create. I am in no rush, sir. So you go ahead.
Yeah.
We're hanging out here.
So I think I'm going to answer the question directly, and then I'm going to answer what I think is actually the question behind it. Mm-hmm. So, like, in terms of filming a video, you want to make sure, like, here's the biggest thing: start with yourself as the audience. What are the angles that you find most beneficial? Build your video around that, because more than likely there's more people out there than just you that also respond to those angles and also respond to that style of producing videos. So in the grand scheme of things, like, the equipment you use is really not that important. Like, when it comes right down to it, good content is good content. Like, and to loop back around to a previous topic of conversation here, go back and look at my earlier videos. They're terrible. But they're terrible because I was making bad content, not because the equipment was bad, which it was, but because I didn't know how to be on camera yet. And it took a long time for me to learn how to be good on camera. It took me a long time to learn how to structure a lesson. You can watch that evolution taking place over the course of the history of my channel. And so
I will be a testament to that. You can, folks. You can see his earlier content. Like, me personally, not just him. Like, I will agree with him 100%. Not to say your old content was shit, but like your new content, you just stepped up a level, man. So I got to give it up.
Well, and the thing is, though, is I learned how to make good content with bad technology. I learned how to make good content with bad equipment. Like, if you can make something shine through, even when you're using a, point and shoot camera that just happens to have a video setting that only lasts for 10 minutes, and you're in a dark room where the lighting is terrible. If you can make if you can make a lesson or like whatever you're playing with Poi pop out through all those restrictions, then by the time you get to better equipment, your content will absolutely slay. Work out the kinks with bad equipment, figure out what works and what doesn't, and then make the investment to make to do the polish level on it. When you get to a point where you understand the craft underneath it, that's when you're in a good position to upgrade.
Right.
And the question underneath that, which is what makes good content, is so it took me a long time to understand this, but fundamentally all content is based around, and I'm going to put on my entrepreneur hat for a second here. So I'm going to use some words that we don't like, but
you go ahead, bro.
No, it's about providing value for your audience. It is about showing up and giving them something that is going to make them feel good about the fact that they just spent 5 or 10 minutes with you on their phone, and what exactly that looks like is going to be highly subjective depending upon where your interests lie, and also too what people are interested in seeing from you out there. So it always helps to start with what you enjoy, because if nothing else, you'll have an audience of one. But take the feedback as it comes in. Listen to people when they tell you, hey, can you get to the beginning of the lesson sooner? Do you really need to spend this much time like giving me background or talking about your aunt that taught you this many years ago? And this is really hard for me to this day, but go back and watch your content. I have the hardest time watching my own videos.
Me too. Me too. Yeah, I do too.
Whenever I watch one of my videos, all I can think about is like, the choices that I had to make in the editing room and wondering if I made the right ones. And I'm always afraid when I sit down and watch one of my videos that what I'll really see was the better version of it that I could have made if I just spent more time on it. And it can be hard to navigate that, but it really is worth it, because every once in a while I'll sit down and watch something that I made and be like, oh, that was actually really cool. That is something that I would want to watch. That's something that like I'm glad is out there in the world.
You've made so much good content, man. I got to give it up, because like as the disagreements that we've had over the years or whatever it may be, I have to see you in a certain light of like, you are in a lot of ways an innovator, and you are in a lot of ways a person that has created so much good content over the years, and somebody that has added a lot of discussion that needed to be added by somebody, and you were the person to do it, man. So
thank you.
When it goes like down to profiles in Poi or your tech vlogs or the videos that you made, having the camera accompany you to flow arts festivals or whatever it was that you were doing, you had a very innovative approach to the things that you were doing. And as far as like content creation, you have made so many videos that I just wish were out there, that you are the only person to touch on, right? So as far as like flow artist pay and flow arts festivals as a whole, and what there needs to happen in the future as far as paying flow artists what they deserve and what we need to do to sustain as a community, there's been so many things that you've touched on that are just very, very relevant. So I have to, aside from your poi spinning, aside from the videos that you've made from actually spinning poi and showing us tech poi, right? Aside from all that stuff, you have contributed so much to the discussion of the whole community, right? So I do very much value your opinion as far as like what has worked for you over the years, the projects that you have abandoned and the projects that you've decided were worth it to continue. So you definitely have so much to add to the conversation as a whole. And I very much appreciate that.
I appreciate hearing that. Thank you very much.
So on that very line, I do want to transition into one more topic. You have, throughout your years of creating videos and throughout your years of being a content creator and delivering your personal opinions on things, you've faced a fair amount of backlash and controversy and there has been as you have gained popularity, there has been a fair share of, like I said, backlash, and you have been a target essentially by many people. And this has been for several reasons, but I'd like you to touch a little bit on how you navigate the ugly side of the online world and kind of like the lessons that you've learned, how you approach that. Like, speak a little bit about that.
Goodness. So there are some days when it's really rough. I'm not going to lie. And there was definitely a point where this would have happened 2 months ago, where I suddenly realized that like the hater comments, it was not just like one coming in a day, but it was coming in like almost one an hour.
Oof.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there was definitely a point where I like reached out to my bestie and I'm just like, and I started sending him screen captures. I'm just kind of like, so this is now like a regular thing. This is a regular part of my day. And I think a lot of people that leave those comments don't understand that like it's not just them doing it, that it is an enormous volume of people. And to a certain extent, I recognize that when I wade into territory that is likely to be controversial, is likely to, rattle some cages, that I'm gonna get some blowback on it. And sometimes I'm in a place where I feel prepared to do that. And sometimes the blowback that comes is coming from an angle that I don't expect. And it still kind of knocks me off balance.
Sure.
Part of, and yet I'm still doing it, clearly.
Still out here.
Yeah. So number one, having a great support network is really, really helpful. Like I have people that I can go to on a rough day. I've been in therapy for the past 5 years. Having my therapist to go to with this stuff is really amazing. I feel much less alone dealing with it because,
sure,
even most of my friends here in DC, a lot of them are even amongst flow people, I don't think they grok that. I know.
They don't fully understand. They don't fully understand the spectrum of what's happening, right? So, like, even your local friends, like, it's hard for people to put themselves in your shoes, man. I mean, you're dealing with a very unique set of circumstances where you're kind of the pioneer and the forefront of a lot of the content creation based around poi. So nobody's been in your shoes before, man. So I think it's fair to have a certain level of like, what the fuck is happening? Who do I reach out to? What do I do? Why is this happening? Like, I can relate to that, and I can understand that to a certain degree. So, yeah.
And I mean, I think people understand that it happens. I don't think they understand the volume that it happens in, but, there's been a lot of things that I've like let myself get upset and responded in moments that I shouldn't. And I was really heated, and I look back on it and just be like, I shouldn't have fed the trolls. And about a year ago, I started getting into the habit of like, when I got a comment that like made me see red, I would tell myself, it's like, okay, you have to take an hour away from any device. Go for a walk, go for a hike, go flow for an hour. If you still want to respond to this in an hour, then you can respond to it then. But like, as of right now, don't do it. Wait until you've calmed down.
It's such an important lesson for anybody who is online. Yeah, I can not to try to compare myself to you in any way in your kind of like relevance and take over the community and stuff. But I've even experienced. Just for myself, I've even experienced a fair share of, people saying this and that about me and comments that got me to be, quite frankly, very fucking angry. So I think that is a very healthy approach to say, hey, I need to clear my mind, need to take a walk, see how do I want to respond to this person. And to give yourself a little bit of credit, you're one of the only people that I've seen that has a large following that will actually engage with people on a long forum discussion and actually address what they're saying into a deep level. Like, you've always been somebody who will address somebody's point into a very long extent conversation where it's like, if you want to talk about it, let's talk about it, man. Like, I have a lot of things to say about it, and if I feel like a lot of people are not prepared to have a long form discussion with you and actually dissect why they feel a certain way. So I will give you a lot of credit on that front. And also, like, y'all have to realize that, like, this man is a person as well, and he has his own struggles and his own viewpoints and his own trigger moments where he's upset about something that you said that correlates to, you know, his life or his experience. So I think there's a lot that people kind of, there's a lot of like dehumanizing going on to where it's like they can't really fully see you as being a person out here that is just trying to do his best and add to the conversation in the ways that he sees are appropriate, you know?
Sure. Well, and I recognize that some of what is happening there is parasocial relationships are really difficult for people to navigate in general. This was a thing that I've run across very frequently at fire festivals, in that, you know, very clearly the plan around my content was to make people feel like they were hanging out with your friend.
Exactly.
And
going
then
all the way back. Going all the way back.
The flip side of that, though, is there's a lot of people out there that think of me as being their friend that I've never met. And they'll have really specific expectations about what interacting with me will be like. But I haven't necessarily participated in the creation of any of those expectations. So it can get into really sketchy territory. And especially like, so I will actually send you the link to this after we get done here. But
please do.
No, I also want to put out there, I really respect what you're doing here with this. I'm glad that you're producing media around flow arts and juggling. And I think that our community is better for having more of that going on. So awesome. And even more so, like, mad respect for working on solving a problem I didn't want to work on. But and as your channel grows, as your presence grows, you're also going to have to deal with more and more of this. And
I know.
one of the most helpful tools I've found was a few months ago, I ran across this channel, a woman who is in grad school working on her clinical psychology degree, and she does different videos on different topics in psychology. And she specifically had a video on dealing with haters online by doing what's referred to as shadow work. That is, when something happens that makes us deeply upset, there's usually a reason for it. And that one of the things that we can engage in when we encounter online comments that make us really upset is that we can do a little bit of self-interrogation and figure out, where is this emotion coming from? What button did they push? Why does this specific button set me off? And we wind up learning a lot about ourselves in the process. In some cases, we discover that the reason that this pushes our buttons is because this is a thing that we know that we ourselves do, and we're kind of ashamed of it. And in some cases, something pushes our buttons because it reminds us of something that somebody used to do it to us back in the distant past that really hurt us. And I got a lot out of this video, and I continue to use those techniques to this day to work through the stuff that's coming in. And it's really been a huge help to me. So I hope it can be a huge help to you too.
Right. Yeah. And I definitely very much resonated with you saying that there are certain trigger things that people will say, because even in my time and my, you know, meteoric rise in the Poi community, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, man, people have said some shit to me that I'm like, fucking, you don't know me at all, brother. Like, if you think that's what you have no idea, you have seen a video of me. You don't know who the fuck I am, bro. Like, I was doing this shit back when I was a kid, and people used to fucking pick on me for what I did. They'd think that what I was doing was weird, man. Like, it was what I was doing, poi spinning back in the day, was not cool, man. It was, what's that guy doing around playing with his balls? Like, I did it because I loved it. If you think that I'm doing this shit for clout, you have no fucking idea who I am, man. You have no idea, because I was doing this shit again when it wasn't cool, when I hid it from my friends, I hid it from people who knew me. I didn't even want them to see. Like, there was a layer of protection based around like what I was doing and people want to claim that like what I'm doing, the content that I'm releasing now, or the videos that I'm releasing now are for like clout. It's like, motherfucker, I've been doing this since way before I even thought that anybody would see my videos, anybody that would think I was cool or what I would be invited to. Like, that was before any of that, right? So intention is so crucial, and like, people can't see the intention behind the video because they don't know you as a person. So it's like, your intention behind making a video is so different than what people actually think is really happening, right? So
I know. Like, if I wanted to post videos for clout, I know exactly what that would look like. I would just take whatever was the latest deep house track that everybody was loving. I'd wear a set of, I'd wear a set of harem pants and like a sleeveless shirt that I hadn't washed in 2 weeks, and I would just stand with my feet planted. Like, it's not hard. Like, that's just it. Like, I know exactly what the channel that could destroy my channel would look like. And like, I do what I do because like, I love what I do and I want to support other people out there. Like, it's kind of wild because the things that people accuse you of wind up saying a lot about like what they're really working through and the things that they don't know how to acknowledge about themselves. And sorry, there's a point I had in my head that keeps coming and then going and coming. You know how that happens where it's just like, oh, that's such an important thought. And then it like runs away as you're in the middle of talking about another one. God bless it. It was haters leaving comments, talking about clout. Frick, where did it go? Where'd it go? Shoot. Bloody hell, I think it's gone now. I'm sorry. It's been a very long day, and some of my faculties are no longer working at full
do
power
we still
here.
have audio?
Yeah, still do.
Okay, perfect. All right.
Yeah. God, hang on. Give me just 1 second.
You take your time, Drex. You take your time. Anybody that was curious about hearing the conversation and hearing us genuinely interact with each other as human beings, they are still here and they're still in here. So yeah, you're good. Take your time. I want you to be able to clearly and convey your thoughts in a manner that feels authentic. So I feel like this is much more of a conversation, and podcasting in general is so much more of a
that's it. I got it. Yeah. No,
okay,
so that's just it. No, producing content is in and of itself a really vulnerable act because you are inevitably sharing parts of yourself with the whole wide world, and it is revealing in ways that people often don't realize. And the thing is that when you're out there sharing a lot of content and being vulnerable like that, the negative side of that is you're also giving people a how-to guide on how to hurt you. You're showing them exactly the ways in which you're vulnerable. And it sucks because like, it doesn't mean you should stop being vulnerable because it is a beneficial.
Dude, we're all out here doing our own thing. Like, yeah, it's you have to provide your experiences and your take on things, and these things are important. So yeah, there's gonna be things to disagree upon, and we can't just shoot each other down at the first moment that we have to pick someone apart. Mm-hmm. And I think that podcasting is such an important thing because if you actually got to know this man Drex, not saying that I do, right, but the conversation helps people try to relate with you and try to see the human side of you, and not just a content creator, but as an artist and somebody who is doing something that nobody's done before. As far as I am a poi content creator, like what the fuck, there's nobody that's even done that before. So you're navigating uncharted territories, and we have to give this man a little bit of grace. That's my whole thing.
I appreciate that because one of those weird things about parasocial relationships, just like traditional celebrity, at a certain point, somebody gets flattened down into an object and they become the thing that you need them to be rather than the thing that they are. And there's a 3-dimensional person sitting on the other end of it, you know?
somebody with their own thoughts and feelings on issues that they're covering. Yeah. And
Exactly. And
I
some
have
of those
so
things are
many
sloppy, like toroids.
I have so many issues, even just kind of going on a little bit of a personal thing is I have so many issues, even just replaying content and episodes that I've had with people where I'm like, damn, you've said this so many times. You've approached this in a way that you could have had so much of a more clear, concise thought process on things. And the reality is we're not always going to be the most present and like foresight things of like issues. You're gonna have things that you wish you would have said and things that you wish you wouldn't have said on a certain topic, and that's based on our emotional reactions and our current mind state. And there's a lot of things that when it's out there as permanent content, it's like, fuck, I didn't really mean to say that now that's just permanent. And people can quote me and people can take their own opinions on what I said. Like, it's stressful.
So I've got a story for you on that one. So some of my content is scripted and some of it's not. And the stuff that's not, I have regular vocal tics. I say yeah a lot. And at one point I had a vocal tic where when I was talking and I was trying to get to the end of a thought, I would keep saying "and everything" because it was no, it was kind of my brain trying to throw on the brakes and be like, okay, you need to get to the end of this thought before you blow this part of the take, and it was so weird because out of nowhere, like it started off with just one person saying it, and then within weeks, literally every comment I got, every single one on YouTube was people telling me, you have to stop saying "and everything."
Y'all don't do that to me. Don't do that to me, because I have these things too, and we all do. If you were on the other end of this camera, you would be saying the little things that you say. I would say I still do say this a lot, but I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. Oh, that's beautiful. Like, whatever. I'm responding to things that people are saying. So these little things that I say that I hate about podcasting that are just a part of my vocabulary and a part of my responses, to where I'm trying to either think about what I'm going to say or I'm trying to process my thoughts. Like, we all have these things, so don't hold it against us. I very much relate to you in a lot of ways.
Well, so here's the thing is at a certain point, it got to such a volume that I decided to train myself out of it. I went for 3 solid months, nothing but scripted content, so I could work on training myself out of having that vocal tic. And I did it. I no longer say that. But you know what happened? People started digging up the older videos and leaving the same damn comments on the older videos, even though I had just spent 3 months completely changing my vocal habits so I wouldn't have this vocal tic anymore. So whatever shit people are giving you, they're doing it because they're giving you shit, not because the thing is actually a problem. It gives them a moment where they get to feel like, oh, I get to take this person down a peg. So don't take it personally.
Pick on him. And yeah, what's funny is like nobody's actually even commented these things on me personally yet, but I mentally comment on myself and I'm like, damn, you've said this so many times. Or my little verbal habits on when I'm having a discussion with people. So the thing is nobody's perfect. We're trying to give you guys the content and the discussions that I would like to deliver and would like to be a public format, but we're not always going to do it perfect. And this is something that you have to give both of us grace on. And at the end of the day, realize that if you were doing this thing, there would be things that we could pick on you for, and you wouldn't feel too good about it either. There's no,
and that's why a lot of
remedy.
them are not doing it.
It's hard, motherfuckers. Sorry. Yeah, no, but it's difficult. It's difficult. And I will say this just to close things out. You have been the only guest that I feel like I have had so much more to get through, to where I had topics for days. I'm scrolling right here on my iPad. Yeah. I had topics for days that I wanted to get through with you because you're such a prevalent figure in the poi community, and you are very, very much a part of our story as a collective, right? And this conversation in this podcast has been, I've wanted to get into so many different things, but you have so much to say, and I feel like we just need to give a little bit of respect towards this man as far as the amount of things that he has covered, the amount of topics that he has, the space, the mental capacity to cover. And I would be very, open to doing another episode because, again, we have not covered very much of this stuff that we had to get through. And I feel like we had to very deeply cover the topics that we wanted to. So I really appreciate your time and your expansiveness on the topics that I have brought up and your personal story, as well as your thoughts on flow arts festivals and artists and poi and everything in between, everything that we've covered. I really do appreciate your involvement in the project, and just y'all show Drex some love in the comments below. Okay, let him know if you're having a disagreement on something that he has said in a respectful way, because I have been a victim of getting a little bit too heated based on something that you've said, specifically on the tech poi thing. So I have fallen victim to this as well, and I apologize if I have given you feedback in a manner that was disrespectful or too heated or whatever. We all just need to check ourselves a little bit as far as like our emotional response to the topics that we're discussing and the intention behind what he's saying, right?
Yeah. And also too, I think it's important for me to recognize the moments when like what I say isn't received with the intention that was behind it. Like, I remember the fur when I put out that video about the death of tech poi, and in my mind, what it was, no, in my mind, what I was really saying was just like, this has changed since it was my scene. And what a lot of people heard was, what we're doing right now isn't good enough. And that was never my intention. And for that, I am sorry that landed the way it did. And
I was one of those people. I was one of those people, and I think that it's important for us to find commonalities and find points of discussion where we're not blaming each other as individuals. We're actually talking about the topic at hand. So I think it's important for you to be able to realize like, hey, this wasn't maybe like the intention of the delivery. And dude, that's just gonna happen when you are a content creator and you're somebody who's discussing these things on a weekly and monthly basis. You're going to have things that maybe came across in the wrong way. So I appreciate you touching on that issue. And I would love to do another, episodes, maybe more focused around some specific topics.
Yeah. I now I'm kind of curious, like of the topics that we didn't get to cover, like what is the one that you most wish we had hit up?
Oh man. So I think, as far as topics that I wish we had discovered, let me go ahead and just look over here really quick, and we can close it out with this one. Oh, actually, you know what? I do have it in mind. So, as far as artist pay in the flow arts community, and as far as the performers, instructors that are supporting these larger organizations that are the flow arts festivals, how do you think it's impacted the community negatively? That we have, or I wouldn't say we, I say flow arts festivals that have seeked a lesser, I don't want to say lesser quality, but let me word this in the way that I actually mean. Flow arts communities or flow arts festivals that are trying to be more profitable, which I don't blame them for. First of all, I don't blame you for, because you're trying to make it work. You are doing a service that we all appreciate, but there is a double-edged sword where you're trying to make it more profitable, and you're also seeking talent that doesn't require a certain threshold of payment, right? Because they seek to be exposed to the community in a healthy manner as far as performing, teaching, everything like that. And you've discussed the kind of, I don't want to like directly quote you wrongly here, but as far as like a validation economy, right? And you've covered this a little bit on your other videos, and that I have been a part of. But inevitably, when you're paying artists less than what they're worth, the talent that is international and that know their worth, they're not going to show up, man. And I will say, as much as I love beginners and I love people that are at their intermediate phases, and I just love people being involved in the flow arts world, it takes a lot to impress me. It takes a lot to impress me. A lot of the magic has been faded, and it's an unfortunate part of my reality to where I want to encourage people, but at the same time, it's difficult to genuinely feel a certain way about someone spinning when I have been doing this shit for a long time, my friend. I am in my own ways creating things that I find to be incredible, and that I have been doing this for 15 plus years. And it's hard to find, I don't mean to go on a tangent here, but it is difficult to be inspired truly at my core in the same way that I used to be, right? So
yeah,
a topic that I find that you cover that's very important and very applicable and is, in my mind, at the forefront of the flow arts kind of like the debacle that we're facing as far as artist pay, performer pay, like what do we do? How much are people worth? What should we prioritize? I love that you have been covering topics such as this. So I'd like to hear you speak a little bit about that, please.
Okay. Shoot, the rabbit I was going to pull out of the hat was like, come to the next one that I'm here for the answer to this. But I'll give you.
Well, you can if you want to. You can keep it brief.
It's okay. I'll give you the shortest version of this answer that I can. Clearly, the reason we didn't get through all these topics has nothing to do with you. It has to do with the fact that I give really long answers to things. There is a reason I don't have a problem keeping up with a content calendar. I never do you have any idea how many scripts I have sitting on my computer that are never going to see the light of day because I got 3 pages in and just decided, yeah, no, I don't have enough there. Anyway, so there's a few things I want to pick out of there. I think so. One of, and I think this is the most important piece, is that I think a big part of the reason why I'm so disappointed in the ways that flow festivals have evolved over the course of the past decade, and you may relate to this too, is that when I first started going to them, it was definitely a place where you went to for inspiration, and the product has changed. The product is no longer necessarily showing you what's possible with the thing. The product is to make you feel seen. And I want to be really, really, really clear on this. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be seen. We live in a culture that is continuously tearing us down and making us feel invisible and like we're not good enough.
Insignificant.
Exactly. And when people go to flow festivals and they get picked for the teaching lineup or the performance gala, or they see themselves in photographs of the event after the fact, they feel seen. And that's a good thing. That is important. But it's also something that should be explicit about what the product is. And as long as there is still on some level an expectation that the product is this kind of inspiration, then we're going to have a problem with people showing up to these events and seeing stuff that doesn't necessarily inspire them.
And that they maybe can do themselves. They maybe can do themselves.
Well, and I think there is, I will also say, and big old underline on this, this is not to excuse the flow festivals, but I also think for a lot of us, we have some work to do too, in terms of recognizing that we are 10 years into this, or however many years we are into this. Right. I'm a decade and a half into it at this point. And we've seen a lot of stuff come and go, but a lot of other people are getting to experience these things for the first time. And that's also important. We got to have those moments, and they should get to have those moments too.
Yes.
And those moments are still valid for them. At the same time, I don't think we can construct an entire industry around them. I don't think, it makes me sad that after accumulating a certain amount of experience in the flow arts world, you've automatically priced yourself out of being able to return to the events that first inspired you. That just sucks.
It does.
And I think that there should be room for both. Like when we start doing this, when we start spinning props, we stick out. Like, and that's part of what pulls us into it in the first place. We get to feel unique and special in a lot of ways. And it's very natural when people go into that to want to feel seen. And at the same time, I think it's also important that we as a community support people who have decided to make the commitment to engage in giving resources to the community as, you know, as an occupation that happens even outside of the flow festivals. Like I used to help run a flow festival, and there's this 6-month window that it happens in where it's an absurd amount of work. And I think so many people that run flow festivals forget that for so many of the teachers, the work doesn't end when the festival is done. This is a year-round thing for us. And if we're going to come and be a part of these events, we also have to feel like we're being supported by the community around them. We can't just take an infinite amount of time off from what we're doing, because it's like the hustle around this is really, really difficult.
It is.
If I can't afford to take a loss by, you know, going and performing for some charity here in DC, I can't do it for a flow festival either.
Ooh, that was an important one. Yeah, and you know, I don't want to touch too much on the topics that you've already covered in your content specifically. And if you guys want to hear him talk about these things in more detail, and in a more scripted manner, to where he actually has his content and his like words dissected, go ahead and check out his videos. Yeah, sometimes scripted, sometimes not, which I very much appreciate in its own right. But yeah, this is an important issue that sticks out to me particularly because we've had things happen locally where I'm sure y'all have had these things happen too, where it's like we have artists who are just willing to put themselves up for free for I just want to be seen. I just want to perform. I want to be seen. And again, you've already said that it's not a bad thing necessarily. I don't blame the artist. I blame the person who is willing to let it happen.
Yeah. Well, and I think that sometimes this is also a message to us that if we want to have spaces where we can make an income doing this, we also have to create spaces for people to feel seen, because there is still a need for that.
And I hope y'all take my words with a grain of salt, in the sense that, like, I love where you are at. You watching this specifically, I love where you are at. I love your journey, and I am not trying to put any artist down to where, like, oh, you're not at this level, you shouldn't be like on. I do not mean that at all. I respect the journey along the way. We've already spoken about, you know, the times of feeling insignificant and the times of feeling like we're not good enough. I don't mean to take away from that experience. I'm specifically saying that I feel like if you're performing for a flow arts festival, you should have something to add to the conversation, to where it's like, I've never seen this before. This is unique. This person is pushing something in a way that we have not seen before. And I think that is the more important issue, right? And there's a lot of people that can do a lot of the same tricks and a lot of the same, like, it's not any hate towards them as an individual, but it's saying that if we're attending a festival and we're going to this place to be inspired, like what you were talking about, we attend these festivals to create a new level of inspiration for ourselves personally. And I feel like it's a little bit of a responsibility for somebody organizing a festival to create a lineup where we know that the audience will be taken back, they will be inspired, they will feel something based on the patterns that we're doing and the way that we're incorporating our specific loves for what we're doing. So really appreciate you touching on that issue. This has been a great episode. We really so much appreciate you coming on and having the vulnerability to discuss these issues in a long format. Not everybody in your position would be able to or would be willing to discuss these things with somebody. So we very much appreciate you.
I'm just shocked I got through 2.5 hours as coherent as I did. This has been such a long day. No, seriously, so I got on and I'm just like, this is gonna be the worst interview I ever do because my brain is jello right now.
No, well, hopefully I was able to spur you a little bit creatively. So
definitely did. Thank you for being a great host.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. This has been the whole goal of the podcast, is to discuss things that are visually appealing, and we see these things happen on Instagram, YouTube, whatever, all your platforms, but nobody actually talks about it and the work that's created behind the scenes and the approach that we have. And so we'll go ahead and close it out. Drex, Joey, if you want to show Drex's in tags here, y'all already know who Drex is. Hopefully you need no introduction. If you know who I am, you probably know who this man is. So yeah, we appreciate you, man. We'll go ahead and close it out, but I want to give you a big thank you and a shout out to being here and doing this with us today. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Peace out, y'all. 8th episode.
Keep up the great work.
Thank you, buddy.